Hello everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, An Introduction to SharePoint. My name is Olivier Menel, and I am the Events and Communications Officer at Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand. Our webinar today will be presented by Stephanie Kichias, who is Senior Consultant at InfoExchange. A recording of Stephanie's presentation and a copy of the slides will be sent to you all in the next couple of days, and from then you'll be able to access them at any time on our website. If you have a question during the webinar, please type it in a question box on your webinar panel and we will answer them at the end of the webinar. If you have any technical issue, please also type it in the question box, and I'll now hand over to you, Stephanie.
Thanks, Olivier. Hello, everyone. Thanks very much for signing up today to hear this webinar about SharePoint. So this session is really aimed at people who are thinking about implementing SharePoint at their organisation, and I'll talk a little bit about what some of those drivers might be for businesses to be looking into using SharePoint in their organisation. But basically, it's a very much an introductory session. I'm not assuming much prior knowledge to SharePoint, so apologies if you know some of this stuff, but it's important that we pitch it to people who don't really know much about the platform at all. We also run through Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand some more in-depth sessions on SharePoint. If you're a little bit more intermediate, you're more than welcome to look online for any further sessions about the platform. And there's plenty of resources on Microsoft's sites about this platform, and especially with SharePoint Online. So today we're going, and I should also say, yes, as Olivia stated, I'm going to try and keep this leave a good amount of time at the end for questions. I'm more than happy to take your questions at the end, and if there's anything really pressing, I'm happy to do it during it, but yeah, probably let's try to keep them all to the end so we can do them all together. So today's session is just an introductory session to SharePoint. So we're going to cover some basic things, so just what it is and why some companies and organisations use it. We're going to talk about what it's not, and one of the sort of things that the Office 365 suite will offer its customers, and how SharePoint fits in with those and where it all fits in together, because there's pretty much now an ecosystem of applications that come with Office 365, and SharePoint's just one of them. And we'll also, at the end, I do like to cover what I think are sort of my 4 big best practice pieces of advice for those really considering implementing it, and you know, what your next step should be, and how you would go about that, like in terms of just big questions to think about before you dive in. I will say that, look, SharePoint is very comprehensive. It is a very big system and has been around for a long time, and maybe you have been exposed to SharePoint systems before in jobs. SharePoint traditionally was a platform for big corporates to work on, and there's been a whole industry created around it, building and developing on it as a platform for businesses to build intranets. I'm not really going to go into any of that today. It's well beyond the scope of an hour session would be to go into that sort of stuff. Really today is focusing on how smaller organisations and non-for-profits can leverage the technology, because now that in Australia and New Zealand Microsoft have made Office 365 free or very, very discounted for non-for-profits, SharePoint is a major part of that, and part of what non-profits can take advantage of. And so I'm going to be focusing very heavily on the sort of out-of-the-box and sort of just basic features of the site, bearing in mind though that yes, there's a lot of things you can do with this platform, and there's a lot more customization and things to build on, but again, that's kind of out of scope for today. So what is SharePoint? SharePoint is a system that organisations use to build intranets, which is basically a secure internal website. As I mentioned, it used to be used by a lot of big organisations as their internal content management system, or CMS, and it used to be just a server-based product. So you had to buy a server, you had to set up a server to run with the SharePoint application on. You also needed a SQL server to run alongside it, so it actually required 2 servers, and it was a big, investment for organisations to run, and then you needed consultants and other people to kind of manage it and run it, because these things don't just run on their own. That part actually hasn't changed. I mean, one of the things I will mention today is that intranets don't run on their own, and they need people to manage and feed information into it, and we'll touch on that later. But basically, yeah, back in the day when it was sort of just a server-only product, it was quite a big investment, and that's why it tended to be your Telstras, your big banks, your mining companies, and big organisations with lots of staff around the country, using it to connect across offices. But now it's available as part of the Office 365 suite. And so to access it, you need 2 things. You need your Office 365 login, and that logs you into SharePoint Online, which is part of the Office 365 suite. SharePoint Online is the online version of SharePoint, and it's essentially Microsoft's it's where they're releasing most of their upgrades and bits and pieces of new features all the time. Is they actually have started going a cloud first, Office 365 first deployment route. So what used to happen was, if there was a change to the platform, you'd have to download the upgrades and download the update and manage a downtime overnight, and run your server upgrades and make sure nothing broke and all that sort of stuff. All that's gone. It's all just in Office 365, and you log in with your Office 365 account, and it's there, and you don't have to worry about any of that back end. I guess the only thing you have to think about is your storage, and how much data you need to store, and you can control that in the settings. But otherwise, it's very much you don't manage it as a server. And then there's my iPhone just thought that I asked to speak to Siri, so that was interesting. So you also need a web browser, obviously, because it's a website. It's hosted on the internet, on web pages, and so you need Internet Explorer, Chrome, Firefox, whatever it is. Safari will run it as a website. And essentially, because it's all with your Office 365 login, it's secure and is hosted on Microsoft's cloud servers, which are in Australia now. So you basically are relying on Microsoft's infrastructure and security to manage your the site and how you get into it. So like I said, we used to just be on a server, which was expensive and took a lot of maintenance, but now it's being hosted as part of SharePoint, of Office 365 and the wider suite. So as part of Office 365, you get a lot of different things, and that actually, this diagram probably could be even busier. There could be even more things I could put on there and to see what Office 365 is. And some of you might have already signed up for Office 365 and might have already, maybe migrated your email onto there. And so you'd know what some of these little icons mean, or they might look familiar to you. But basically, Office 365 is Microsoft's cloud-based storage, cloud-based, I guess, business management tool. And so in that, it comes with, the big one is email, your Outlook online. You can upload all of your emails and manage email in the Microsoft Cloud. You don't need an email server or a dedicated Exchange server to run email anymore. That's all done through Office 365, and that's probably one of the biggest drivers we've seen our clients go to Office 365 for is email. It's just so much more convenient for them to get email up into the cloud, and so much more convenient to migrate to that as opposed to something like Gmail, which is a kind of a different base system to what businesses are used to. There's SharePoint Online, which is part of Office 365. There's OneDrive for Business, which is I'll talk a little bit about that later in terms of what's different between that and SharePoint, but it's OneDrive is a document storage area. SharePoint can be a document storage area as well, and many businesses use it for that. But it's more than that. It's also a set of a wider content management system. You also have Word, Office Online, which is that middle bit there, is Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and OneNote Online, which are browser-based versions of those applications. So just like Google Docs, you can edit documents in the browser. You can edit Word documents in the browser. Now, you don't need Word installed on your machine. Most businesses still do use Word and Outlook and things like that, and you can hook up your Office 365 accounts to those things so that you don't have to work in the browser all the time. And in fact, it's not, it's not the same experience. It's a bit different to your dedicated desktop applications, but it's certainly very convenient if you were logging in from home or a computer that doesn't have those applications installed on them. It's all basically up in the cloud, and again, you just need your Office 365 login to get it. And you've got also Skype for Business, which is the new Link. What Microsoft used to call it Link, they bought Skype. They now call it, they've branded it Skype for Business, and it's their internal information management, IM, instant messaging, and video conferencing. So just like Skype. And that's really great too for business. You also get things like Yammer, you get Office 365 video, you get new features like Delve and Sway, all of these things. If you signed up for Office 365, you might have heard of them or seen them. Not really going to too much to go into basically, but yeah, you get a whole suite of different kinds of applications to work with when you get Office 365. So, but today's about SharePoint, and SharePoint is really just a content management system to house web pages and other kinds of digital content, including documents, in a cloud. So most businesses use it for to be their intranet, or as a document management platform, and to house team and collaboration sites for their teams. And that's what we'll focus on today, and the sorts of things you can do with SharePoint today. So there are a few drivers as to why business would look into using SharePoint in their organisation. One of the things I'll first say is that, first of all, it's really, really good for bigger organisations, because the bigger you get, the harder it is for people to communicate, the harder it is for people to stay on the same page about things, the harder for just general administration tasks like, finding policy documents, finding, communicating widely across the business from management, whatever it is that you're doing. The more people, the harder it is to manage, obviously, because there's just more people and people are out and about and perhaps more dispersed around different offices, etc. So one of the big reasons why a business would start looking at something like SharePoint would be because they're getting really big and they want help with organising themselves and communicating better that goes beyond just a file share and email, which is a lot of what businesses tend to use. Like, they've got somewhere where they're just dumping documents and they have email, and that's pretty much it. And they use email to communicate, and they put all their documents in in some folders that someone designed a folder set up 5 years ago, and it's no longer relevant, or maybe no one ever designed it, and it's just grown. So what we see is a lot of businesses saying that they want something like an intranet, which will hopefully reduce email and centralise information for a business, so that internal communications can be a lot more streamlined and a lot less push and a lot more pull. I mean, it's just a general trend we see in digital comms around the world, whether it's social media or in businesses or wherever it is. This idea that you need to go looking for the information you want, and you need to subscribe to feeds, and you need to opt into an email distribution list, or you need to follow the right people on social media to get the information you want. Corporate communications is not unlike that, and is following a similar sort of tact, in that it's no longer really convenient or reliable, and perhaps it never was, to just send an all-staff email. I mean, how do you know people are going to read it anyway? In fact, it just clogs up emails, people's inboxes, and you know, it doesn't necessarily get read, and it's just a hassle for people to manage. Whereas posting something on a Yammer or a SharePoint list is a lot more, can be a lot more easy to go back and find things. Everything's in one spot. And again, though, it becomes up to the employee and the staff to take ownership of their knowledge around the business and to opt in to looking around the intranet for information. Obviously, you try and design an intranet so that it's easy to find things and that it makes sense for people, but definitely this idea that there's a place that you go for things as opposed to they will tell me about it is definitely, I guess, just a general change in the way communications has gone in the last, 20 years, I'd say. And it's certainly, I mean, I think something you see more in younger staff. I would argue that there's definitely a move away from, please don't email that to me, I'll go and look at it in my own time, sort of thing. That's a bit of a generalisation. It's not always true, but it's definitely, I mean, I know personally I can't stand emails like coming at me all the time. I much prefer to go and just look at things in my own time. But people are different. So an intranet does that. Document management. So there is definitely a push towards, with things like Dropbox and with Google Docs, this idea that all of your documents are hosted on a server that's secure within some sort of local network, and that you can't get to from home on your laptop because you need to be connected to the domain or the local network to get access to these locations, because that's how the IT set it up, which is, obviously best practice, because you don't want everyone logging into your documents, is less and less useful for people as more and more people are mobile, and as more and more people want to be able to be flexible in their work and work from home and etc. Cloud-based storage, where you can get your documents from wherever and from your devices, is much, much more a modern way of thinking about documents. And SharePoint can provide that. It can provide document libraries where, again, because it's in the cloud, it's in Office 365, it's securely hosted in the Office 365 environment. But you can log in from home. You can go and edit those documents in the browser if you want. You can have, and you can take advantage of some of the better features that these document libraries hold, like version control and co-authoring and things like that, where you can. It's just a lot more of a sophisticated platform than your standard just file share, which is really just a dumping ground for documents, and you have to do a lot of manual saving and archiving. And finally, team sites. So kind of like an offshoot of the intranet is this idea that teams need to be able to collaborate and work together, as opposed to just like an intranet of basic information from a business. And SharePoint can really help and facilitate that. So it can have these like things called subsites, where you can link a whole bunch of stuff together, calendars, link lists, task lists, and its own little document library, or however you want to work, for teams to centralize and put all their stuff together, again, so that everything's shared and there's a centralized point for them to go to and collaborate on something. So I'm going to show you a few. I've talked at you a bit. I'll show you a couple of examples of what I'm talking about. Now this screenshot is of a like vanilla SharePoint site. So this is the sort of thing you would get if you didn't have a logo, didn't have any sort of custom colors put on the site, literally just opened up a SharePoint site like basically out of Office 365 and just started adding some basic content, but without doing any configuration really to the look and feel. This is what you're going to sort of start to look like. What you've got there is, you know, a news feed in the center, which is coming from the, you know, probably from the business down, like little, you know, read more sort of stuff. You've got quick links along the right to other systems, so it's really great. Intranets are great for just at least linking. Like, I get a lot of clients say things like, can we just have a, you know, can they go there so that they can go to their timesheet system or that they can go to their CRM system or whatever it is? And of course you can. It's just a link. At the end of the day, this is just a website, and as long as you're logged in, it's working like any other website. You can have images, you can embed video, and you can link off to all different sites. Now that link will probably link you off to, unless you have some sort of complex single sign-on thing going on, it'll probably just link you off to another login page so that you can log into the CRM separately if it's a different system. If it was all in Microsoft and you had it all nicely hooked up, you could potentially have single sign-on for everything. But most systems, depends on the systems really, so that's a whole thing. But yeah, you know, you can link off to other things. Down the bottom you've got like a little staff directory, like a phone list, you've got an events calendar, and along the left there you've got some important document libraries. So like I want to find policies, so I go to my policies library in the left, and that's where all the main versions of all the business policies are, and training documents or templates or anything like that, forms that the business uses. And along the top you've got their finance above home, next to the home site, you've got these, they're what we would call subsites for teams. So in there you've got, you know, where would the finance guys keep their stuff, and if you've got any questions or if you want to go find finance information, you'd go there. And you know, how that looks and all the different labels and different things there would depend on your business, and you can set that up and label them however you want. That's been created from scratch. So this is sort of like the sort of things that my clients want and get, and it sort of starts from about here up in terms of how much customization they can get. You can do quite a lot of customized skinning. That does require special kinds of consultants to come in and skin the site to make it look, you know, put certain colors and certain font types across the site so that it's on brand for you. But a lot of our clients in non-for-profit don't need that level of customization, or can't really justify the cost. So instead we use things like images and videos and putting custom colors along the top and just doing little bits that we can to make it a little bit more on brand. But again, ultimately what you're looking at here is another example of a very out-of-the-box. There's no code there. That's just putting in images, changing some color schemes, and putting in certain types of content that they wanted. So this is a sort of a demo site. But this is again the sort of thing you'd get, you know, an image, a video, you can embed video, you can have CEO updates and links, and again, yeah, it's not that different to what you saw before. This is an example. I just throw this one in there because this just gives an example of the sorts of things you can do with skinning. So again, what you're looking at now is actually not that different to that, but the thing about this is that it's had branding applied to it, so the menu looks different. These web parts have this little, you know, header color. This has a different menu look and feel. But ultimately, when if you see that sort of new service request bit there, that's still just a standard SharePoint list. So there's been sort of very little. There's just been a skin put over this site essentially. So when we talk about branding and skinning, this is the sort of thing we talk about. But this is again like a department portal. You know, you've got a HR department at the top. You click that, and it takes you to like the HR site, which has some more information for staff if they want to learn about, you know, certain policies or certain processes that they need to go through and other kinds of information. Okay, so the other thing that you can start to do in SharePoint is start to use things called lists, which are basically just kinds of content to hold what would typically be, a lot of businesses have like Excel spreadsheets that they use as like a tally of something, or like a register, or sort of very simple Excel spreadsheets often. They're often not very complicated, but they are very business critical, like you know, an admin team or a HR person or a finance person will have this, you know, this master you know, Excel list that they use to manage certain things and to you know, to keep things on track for whatever reason. And they can often transform really well into a SharePoint list, which is basically just a kind of like an Excel spreadsheet in the browser. And you can design that spreadsheet how you like, with the columns that you want and the types of columns that you want, and you can view them how you like. And when you add new, you can actually customize forms or have forms that allow you to sort of collect the data in a, you know, in a nice, easy way for people. So what you're looking at here is a customized form. So this would take a little bit of development effort. This used something called InfoPath to build. But essentially, the concept of using a SharePoint list to collect data, whether it's fancily done or not, is sort of, and it really does depend on how complex your process is and whatever it, and your spreadsheet is, and how in-depth and customized you want it to be. Often clients overcomplicate things and want it to be a lot more flashy than it actually needs to be, and so sometimes, you know, and it's really about weighing up how much it's going to cost them to develop something like that versus, you know, how much benefit will it actually give them. So with this one, it's like it's the sort of thing you can do pretty easily with just a list, and then it serves two purposes. You're no longer using a kind of clunky to use Excel spreadsheet. You've got a list in the browser that people can sort of filter and find things and search easily, and you've got a much easier way for collecting the data from staff if you want staff to kind of put in a request for something, or a I don't know, just or even just add something to a list for you or something like that. So it really depends. It really depends, but it can be really good, and I've seen it work really well on a number of occasions. I will say that this new starter administration form is the sort of thing that potentially in our organisation we use it, and it works really well. But there are times when some of these processes work better in a system designed for them specifically. So I'm thinking like a HR system. If you have a HR system, for some processes, you know, I'd often advise clients to stick within the system that works, that they're using, because as soon as you start bringing in other data sources, in the long run, that might cause you headaches if you've got different data in different places. But it really depends on the size of the business, the process it is that you're wanting to do, and all sorts of things. So, but I will say that sometimes people try to build things in SharePoint that potentially should wait for a dedicated system, or could potentially be done in that system, and maybe in 5 years' time you're going to have wished you'd done it in that system. So that's just just something to think about when you're thinking about this sort of thing, but certainly can work really well in the right circumstances. So I mentioned document management and version control. So this is one of the examples that I wanted to quickly mention, because it's one of the really powerful things about SharePoint, is what it does with documents. So, you know, document libraries are a type of list. You upload documents, you store documents online. If you've used SharePoint before, concepts of like checking in documents and checking out documents should be very common to you, and you've probably heard those terms before. These days, checking in and checking out isn't turned on by default in SharePoint Online. It's something that you need to go and turn on if you want to, because instead of being more and more like this sort of, I'm taking ownership of the document now I'm going to upload the changes back, it's a lot more collaborative. It's designed to be a lot more collaborative now. So you can still turn those features on if that helps you and you want that, but a lot of businesses found that quite annoying, and especially if they wanted to use the documents as a place of just day-to-day document management, not special documents, just, you know, I've got this thing I'm drafting up and I want to go in and out of it quite a lot. So so you actually don't have to check in and check out things anymore, although you can still. But what you can do is as you can see there, there's now like all of these wonderful, this is all SharePoint Online. If you've used old versions of SharePoint from like say 2010 backwards, what you're seeing now should be quite new to you. This sort of much more interactive, better look and feel of the document management is really quite cool. And indeed, the version history that's built into document management now in libraries is really great. So again, this is all turned on by default. You can change these settings, but by default, version history is turned on, and you can see when every time a document has been edited, its version number, and you can go back and actually review and restore old versions or just view them, and the current version is the one that you see linked. So that's something that's really great, that I see a lot of businesses go, oh, that's going to save a lot of time and a lot of headache. Back when you're working on a file share system, most businesses need to develop some sort of manual version control process. So every time you want to do a new version, you save as and you rename it. Whereas this makes that essentially obsolete because it's built in. Another thing that it does really well, and this is I should probably update this screenshot because this is using 2010, a 2010 version of Word, which still works on 2010, but 2013 is the one that most people are onto now, I guess a lot, and now 2016 is out. But it's the same concept, which is that basically you can have two people in a document at the same time, and instead of it saying this document is locked to someone, which is what would have happened on a file share, and indeed what would have happened back in earlier versions of SharePoint when it was check in and check out sort of stuff. Now, instead, you can both be in the document, or more than two people can be in a document, and it's kind of, I don't know if you can see that, but what it does is it sort of locks an area so that only that person, so if you go into it, it'll lock that paragraph to the person editing it, and the other person will see that they're editing it and won't be able to go into that bit, but they could work on another bit of the document. And so obviously communication is a big part of it, and you talk to people about you know, what you're working on, but it can be incredibly useful for teams to work together on documents. Instead of having, I mean, you know, I come from a consulting background, so, you know, teams would have reports that they're writing, and there'd always be someone, like probably the project manager, who would be in charge of like managing all of the versions and making sure that they all come together at the end and everyone's been updating the right version and things getting sent around via attachment, and you know, all that sort of stuff goes away. Or, you know, you send a link to the document to your teammates and they go in there and they edit the same version, and you all save and upload and you see the changes come, and all of that sort of hassle gets cut away. So when it's working really well, it is an incredibly useful tool for teams. And then finally, one thing that it lets you do is offline sync, and this is still, look, it works well generally, but it's not without its kinks. So I do say use with caution, only because you do just need to watch that it's syncing properly. But essentially, what happens is if you've used Dropbox or Google Drive, it's a very similar concept where it actually takes a copy of the document down to your local machine. So the documents that have been stored up in the cloud in a document library can come down to your machine, so that they're much easier to find from like your typical your Windows browser, like a file share it will look like. And you can just go and find documents that way and click and drag things around document files and folders there, and it's very much like the old experience of using file shares. And what happens is that as long as you're connected to the internet, you don't have to do anything in terms of remembering to sync. It should sync upline automatically off and update your changes so that it's always up to date, and the version that you have on your local machine is the same as the version in the cloud. And yeah, and the other cool thing is that if you were to use it offline, so if you were to take your laptop on a plane, you would still have those documents sitting locally on your machine. You wouldn't need to be connected to the internet to access them. And then when you connect back onto the internet, the changes then sync up. So that's, again, happens without it just happens without you having to do anything. I just say use with caution, because I think, like, whenever you're syncing, especially if multiple people are syncing something, there is potential for there to be corruptions and breaks if someone changes something. So my big tips are to communicate with your colleagues when you're doing this sort of thing, and tell them if you've updated something and that they should maybe check that the sync's working, and use the inbuilt repair functions that OneDrive gives you, because the little application that runs this is called OneDrive, which is a bit confusing because there's a few different things called OneDrive. But basically, just check that OneDrive's working properly, and just be really proactive about it, and you should be fine. But you know, you do see people just ignoring little crosses on things that are clearly telling, you know, warnings that something's not syncing, and that's a problem. You shouldn't do that. So I mentioned team collaboration on team sites. This is the sort of thing that you can have in a sub-site, is like a little project center where you can have like a task list and a news feed and any documents and any other little bits and pieces and links and whatever it is that you want that your team want to use. This can be really useful. And indeed, a task list is one of the big features of that, where you can literally you can have a little timeline and a task list and group tasks and tick them off as you go. So this is really one of the other nice little, and these are all sort of inbuilt. You just need to kind of add these kind of features, and they're just there. You don't have to build them yourself. So I've mentioned a couple of things. I've mentioned OneDrive for Business and SharePoint, and I just want to take a moment to make sure you're clear on the difference. So in Office 365, every user has their own email account, their own Skype account, their own Word Online accounts, and their own OneDrive for Business. And in that, you get document storage. You get your own place of document storage that's just for you. So a lot of businesses, I make the analogy to like some businesses have like a shared drive, but then everyone has their own personal drive, like a H drive or something like that. This is what that would be. Like this is the equivalent kind of concept. Everyone's got their own storage place. SharePoint Online is another document storage place, can be if you want it to be, but instead of it being personalised, it's instead managed by, I guess, IT or whoever's managing the architecture of the site. And so that relates to, say, a typical shared drive where, you know, hopefully someone's managing the architecture of that, and, you know, everyone's clear as to where things have got to go. But you as a user, end users don't necessarily control that. An admin team would control that, and that's the difference. So yeah, when you log into Office 365, and this screenshot I took a while ago, and there's heaps more apps now. I mentioned things like Office 365 Video and Delve, which are there now if you'd see them. But when you log into any part of Office 365, including SharePoint sites, and you click on this app launcher, which is the little top left, you get, you know, a launcher to all these other applications, including your OneDrive, your Outlook, your calendar. And you'll see there OneDrive and Sites. Sites is where all your SharePoint sites are, and OneDrive is your OneDrive, and they take you to two completely separate places. The same document management concepts, like when you go to OneDrive, you'll notice it's just like a document library because it's the same technology, but it's a different place and it's just yours as compared to a site. You get 1 terabyte per user on OneDrive for Business, but that's not expandable. So that's what everyone gets, and that's it. That's actually quite a lot of OneDrive for Business accounts. So like every person who has an account has a OneDrive account, and they each have 1 terabyte. That's how it works. SharePoint Online is instead in the SharePoint tenant structure, you get 10 gigabytes plus 0.5 gigabytes per license, and that's free, but it is expandable. So if you find that that's not quite enough storage for your documents, if you want to put them on SharePoint, you can buy more storage through Microsoft, and I think it's from memory about $3 per gigabyte per year. So if you wanted 100 more gig, it would be about $300 a year. So it's not too bad. And then that's where the data is centrally managed. Now both your OneDrive and SharePoint libraries can be synced down with that client that I talked about. So both you take advantage of both of that offline sync, and yeah, that's the difference. So one is per user, and one is a general pool for everyone that someone has to manage. The other thing you might have heard me mention was Yammer. Yammer is basically a Facebook for businesses, I mean, in the short term. It was founded in 2008, and in 2012 Microsoft acquired Yammer, and since then have been integrating it into their platforms, and have now made it so it's single sign-on with Office 365, so you can log into Office 365 and Yammer with the same login. Well, basically your email address. And basically, a lot of businesses who come to us talking about collaboration and communication across the business, if that's one of their main drivers, we often will kind of point them in the direction of Yammer, because it's just so much more modern and intuitive for most users. If you have Facebook, which like billions of people around the world I think have Facebook, so like almost everyone's on Facebook, then you can pretty much use Yammer. It's so similar. You post, you update, you put polls up, you can like posts, and you can reply and comment and tag people, and you can direct message people, and you have groups, and groups are where different groups of the organization come together and work together, and those groups can be created by management, or they can be created by staff to connect. That's the sort of thing that Yammer is Microsoft's main tool for. And so if cutting down email and having a place where people can talk and chat productively is one of your main drivers, I would seriously look at whether or not Yammer's not more suitable for you than building a whole SharePoint site where, yes, you can have news updates and you can have announcements and things for SharePoint. Yammer is so much more just out of the box, ready to go for you, as opposed to SharePoint, which would need a bit of setup. And SharePoint's still useful for certain things like that. And so sometimes a lot of businesses use both, and we do at InfoExchange. We have our SharePoint site on the but we don't really communicate on SharePoint. We communicate on Yammer, and so we have a little Yammer feed there on the front page. So we've just embedded that, so you can sort of get them to kind of talk to each other. So that's the difference again between Yammer and SharePoint. Yammer's much more social. This isn't a Yammer session, but it's certainly something to think about when you're thinking about what's driving you to SharePoint. Have a think about the other tools out there, because it might be better suited for you. Okay, in the last 5 to 10 minutes before we take questions, I just want to quickly go through what I see as the 4 main things to think about if you're thinking about implementing SharePoint in your organization. First of all, be strategic about it. Why? And be really clear about the answer to why you want something like why you want SharePoint or something like SharePoint. Kind of like what I was just saying about Yammer. Is an intranet the best tool to solve the problem that you're trying to solve? What is the problem that you're trying to solve? And make sure you can really articulate that so that you can then assess the different platforms as to whether or not they're suitable for you. Do you think you're ready, your organisation is ready culturally, but also in terms of size for this way of working? A lot of organisations, I think, get excited about the concept of SharePoint, and they can see that it's really cool and that it would be really useful for them, but they're just not there yet. Like, they're just either not big enough or they're just too new, and they're still still forming their own internal practices and policies that building something, and I see it a lot, like it gets built and then 5 years later it was built for an organisation that looks very different to what it is now. And unless they have an ongoing improvement strategy, which unfortunately a lot of businesses don't, which we'll get to, that they can become very ineffective very quickly. So be really clear as to what it is you're trying to achieve and whether or not you really, really need it, because it's not a small undertaking, and as long as you understand that, it can be fantastic, but you really need to understand its benefits and whether or not it suits you. That's absolutely number one. Then you've got to think about how you're going to do it. So first you need to think about, do you have the capability and capacity internally to implement SharePoint? Now I'm going to say this, I don't have a coding background. I'm not a developer. I also don't even really have an IT background. I was put into a position to be an information manager many years ago at an old job, and through that had to learn how to use our SharePoint platform at that business. And sort of just taught myself how to, and through working with other consultants who came in to help me and doing a lot of like online reading and just a lot of practice, and having basic skills, online skills, like a bit of content management system skills and a bit of digital management skills, like, you know, using websites but not coding, I was able to learn quite a lot about the platform. But it's its own thing, and unless you've got someone interested in your organisation who's kind of like that and keen to learn and wants to just play with it, you might need an external partner to help. And to build a SharePoint site is time-consuming, and especially if you're not going to use automated tasks, you need to dedicate, it's a project that you need to dedicate resources to. So you need to think about that. And you also need to think about it not just from a technical perspective, but, you know, kind of answering the question earlier, like, are you ready culturally? Do you have someone who will champion it throughout the business? Are your leaders on board? Do they want it? Will they support you when you launch it? And will they lead by example? And have you thought about how you're going to launch it from a communications and from a cultural perspective? You know, it's one thing to just build a nice, beautiful thing that makes a lot of sense to you on paper, but if you haven't consulted with the business as to what they want, if you haven't brought them along on the journey, when you launch it, they're just going to be like, what's in this for me? Like, why would I use this? Because people are generally pretty resistant to change as a general rule. So you need to really think about that in terms of how you're going to do it as well. And my point 3 is really important. Think about ongoing management. You have to think about that. You have to, you can't just build it and let it sit there. It will die. Like, you need to make it lively and real for people. When people say, wouldn't it be cool if we had this, or what would be really useful is if I had a space to do this or this form or whatever, someone needs to be able to do that for them, like, and make that real for them, instead of, or at least have a meeting and talk through what it's going to be like, instead of going, oh, that would be nice, and it just sitting there, and people not getting what they want out of it. It needs to change and evolve to the business, and it can, but I just so often see it doesn't. It just sits there, and that's, you know, part of the problem. So I kind of touched on architecture as well. This is the sort of thing we would get into if we were to do a more deep dive. Would be, okay, you want to build up a website, an intranet. What's it going to look like? So, you know, back when I showed you all those sub-site headings and what is it going to be in terms of your architecture and what it is, this is what you have to do. You have to go on paper and you need to run a workshop with your staff and map it out and sort of put on paper what it is you want the site to look like. How many libraries do you need? How many subsites do you need? What do they need to be called? Do you need a subsite for fundraising and communications, or should it be under corporate services? You'll notice that this looks a lot like a org chart because that's how organisations organise themselves hierarchically generally. And even when it's not that hierarchical, there's still I guess, buckets of information. And this is where you've got to think about your documents, storage strategies, and your communication strategies. How do you want to present the information online and what makes sense to you? You need to do it on paper first, and you need to think about it quite a lot before you go ahead and build it. Because once you've done it on paper, it'll make your life building it so much quicker and easier because you'll just have it all mapped out and you just need to go and go new site, new site, new site, call it this, do the thing. Another thing the other thing that you need to think about when you're starting is governance around the site in general and permissions and access. So this is the sort of thing that an IT person would usually help you with, hopefully would be to think about who can access what. By default, SharePoint is open and defaults to everyone being able to access everything and edit everything. And you know, that's still a good rule of thumb to promote use across the business. But obviously there are going to be times, especially if you're moving your documents into the cloud, where that's not going to be obviously practical or best practice to have everyone be able to see everything. You know, obviously a HR team will have documents that they don't want to share. A finance team will have documents that they don't want everyone to see. And you basically, when you're doing this part as well, when you're doing your design, concurrently you need to be thinking about, okay, who can see what and what do we need to lock down, and that might influence your design as well. But it can sometimes represent a radical shift in the way people work. Some organisations maybe haven't been using a file share that well and have been quite siloed in the way they work. I mean, I'm seeing it less and less. I think most organisations are getting better at it, but there is the odd place, and you might be listening now where this speaks to you, where, you know, staff members are very protective of their stuff and don't think that they need to share it with other people and don't want other people being able to go in and edit them. And it's interesting, like you have conversations with people saying, I don't want people to be going in and editing, and you ask them why, and they don't really have a good answer. It's not because it's confidential or because it's, you know, sensitive. It's just because it's mine, you know what I mean? And that's often going to be challenged with a project like this, because the whole idea of a SharePoint platform is that it's sort of less like that and it's more open. So you just need to think about that. That's, again, that cultural question is, are you ready to think like that, and do you want people to think like that? And that's where leadership and having a buy-in from your leaders is really important. All right, we're at the end now. So just do you want to define its purpose, make sure you know what your current information architecture is and audit it and know what it's going to look like, assign people to lead the project, and consider the cultural implications of a more shared approach. We've got 5 minutes for questions. I'm really keen to hear it, and I know it's a rush through, and again, it was high level, so if there's anything I can touch on, I'm happy to.
Thanks, Stephanie. We've got Scott who asks, how hard is it to set up access for staff that are off-site to access SharePoint?
Well, when you say off-site, I mean, as long as they have an Office 365 account, so if they've got an email account and are in your Office 365 user list, when, you know, as an admin you go in and set up accounts and email and mailboxes and things like that, then they have access to SharePoint. And then it's about sort of like what I just said, like by default they're going to have access to your basic site, and you can go in and change that. but it doesn't matter what office you're in, where you are. You don't have to have a VPN. It's cloud hosted, so all you need is to go to any of the Office 365 login portals, put in your email address and your password. It's just like Facebook or any other web application. You just log in with a password from any machine with the internet.
Leanne asks, how do you set up admin rights to set one person to manage SharePoint for the whole company?
Good question. So essentially, so when you set up Office 365, I'm going to answer all these questions assuming you're using Office 365 because it can be a bit different when you're on premises, but this is aimed at Office 365 customers. So Office 365 has and should have, and whoever set up Office 365 initially would be like what would be called a global administrator, which is someone who has God administrator rights across all of your Office 365, including email and everything. And you'd need to get access to that account, and you need the person with that account to go in and, well, that account would have admin rights over SharePoint because they have admin rights over everything. But if you wanted to create another account or give specific users site collection administration rights and all that sort of admin, assigning rights to particular users, that you would need the global administrator to go into your user settings and apply it through Office 365 settings. That's getting a little in depth. I'm sure there would be stuff online that you could search for in terms of setting up admin users in Microsoft site if you wanted a walkthrough on that.
Monica asks if you can set passwords on certain folders or files so to restrict user access or access to certain users only.
Yep. So that was sort of what I was talking about when with the governance planning. So this idea that what will people have access to and what will they not. So say you've got a library under programs, and that library was just for a particular team that you wanted to have access to that. First of all, I would do the analysis first on paper and figure out who it is exactly needs it and what it is they need access to. Then what you would do is best practice would be to create a group. Whether that group would be in Office 365 or SharePoint, it sort of doesn't matter, and that's getting a bit detailed, but essentially you create a group, say in Office 365, an Office 365 security group, give it a name, say call it like the project team, put the users in that group, and then you would go into the settings of the library in SharePoint and you would edit the permission setting for that library and say only people who are in this group can access this library, and take away everyone else's permissions. And therefore, if you weren't in that group and you went to that library, you would get a login or a restricted access page. So that's what I mean about planning out your governance and planning out your access strategy, and that's the sort of thing that does take a little bit of time to get the hang of. But again, there's quite a lot of resources online, and we would go into that in more depth sessions. But that's the essential concept.
Thank you. Marty asks what happens to files in OneDrive if a user leaves the organization, and if there's a way to lock out users from reading files that have been synced to their personal laptop, for example.
That's a good question. Currently, Microsoft don't really, the current OneDrive application doesn't really have a solution for that automatically. You're going to have to, I guess, manually manage that with your staff. I'm told that we're meant to believe that the later version of the the OneDrive sync client is going to be better at that sort of thing in terms of allowing you to set, and I think it would be an IT administrator type thing to do, would be to set rules as to what you can actually set it so people can't download onto their like certain types of laptops if you wanted to have that sort of control. Currently, yeah, if once you're right, once they've downloaded copies to their desk to a computer, to any computer, you're assuming that risk that they can do that, and you're going to have to manage that. Apparently the newer version is going to be better at dealing with that sort of compliance issues. So it is definitely something you'd think about. You can turn off syncing in general. You can stop people doing it altogether if it concerns you. But yeah, currently there's no technical way of doing it. It would be a process thing. When someone leaves the organisation, their OneDrive, you can obviously change their password so that they don't get into any Office 365 things anymore, and administrators can go into their OneDrive accounts. It's sort of a very roundabout way. It's not easy to get in, but you can get in and get their OneDrive documents, because that's a risk that a lot of organisations say, oh, everyone's been keeping stuff in their own accounts, and you know, some of the documentation is important for more than just that person, but there is a way to retrieve it.
Okay, we've got Joff who asks if Office 365 is not viable for them due to poor internet, and he asks how much more difficult is on-site SharePoint.
I would say significantly more difficult, but more I'd say more importantly significantly more expensive. So you'd have to buy licenses for SharePoint. You'd have to make sure there was a server set up. It's two servers set up, one SQL, one SharePoint server. You'd also want, if your local area network connection is good, then that's okay, I guess, because then if you're all local on the same server, then the speed shouldn't be too bad. But look, I don't know, people. I don't know, individual circumstances as to internet connections, but I think more and more investing in good internet should be a priority for businesses as opposed to looking into server products. I mean, just cloud computing is the way. It's just so many businesses, not just small businesses, big businesses are moving to it because it's just so much more convenient and cost effective for them, and especially with non-for-profits. So it is definitely an issue if you don't have fast internet. If you don't have good internet, using Office 365 isn't great. But your alternative is so much more, I think, long-term expensive that I would probably be looking at internet first, as opposed to, because you're going to need that anyway, in my opinion.
We've got Mary who asks if it's possible for clients outside of the organization to access and edit documents on SharePoint.
It is. You can do that through settings. You can set up things called external sharing. So there's like something you turn on, and then, or maybe it's on by default. Don't quote me on that. Can't remember off the top of my head, but it's certainly a setting that you can set to be on or off. And what that does is allow people who don't have Office 365 accounts to access certain things if you share it with them. What they will require is either another Office 365 account from another Office 365 tenant, or they need like a Microsoft account, like an Outlook.com account or a Hotmail account, like something that is Microsoft required. So like they can sign up for one of them for free. But basically, they need that and that would be the login that would be the email that you'd invite, and the login that they would use to access that information. But yes, it is technically possible.
We've got Joanne who says that you mentioned that Skype for Business was included in Office 365, and how is that different to normal Skype? Is there credit included for landline calls?
No, there's not. It's not from. I'm not a Skype for Business expert, so I might not be the right person to answer this. But my understanding is no. It's got nothing to do. You don't buy. I'm pretty sure you can get a VoIP plan on top of it, but that doesn't come with Office 365. They don't provide VoIP like call credit, but it's all over internet. So you do have, it's basically, it's very similar to Skype, like the actual Skype experience, but instead of using your personal Skype login, you use your Office 365 login. And you just have a little application on your desktop, and you log into it, and you can video call people, and you can voice call people, and you can instant message people and things like that. But when you say credit, I think what you're talking about is, yeah, when you're able to call phone numbers from it. You'd have to look into the deals with Microsoft and how they offer that. I think that's my understanding that would be an extra cost, but don't quote me on that.
Thank you. We still have quite a few questions, so do you mind staying back a little bit, Stephanie?
I can stay back another 5 minutes.
Okay. So we've got Michael, who is looking at SharePoint as an alternative to all the Excel spreadsheets they use for CRM, project management, and funding planning. So is it best to structure these into a list than to have design sites that access this data, or is it better to set up the sites and re-enter all the data?
I don't really know if I can answer that in terms of, like, with the amount of information given. That sort of stuff would take a bit of looking at what the data is and figuring out what the best architecture was for it. I did hear you say those CRM, and there are other CRM tools where there's Microsoft CRM, but there's also things like Salesforce and all sorts of CRM tools that are cloud-based these days, and I would strongly recommend you look at those sorts of tools before you started trying to build from scratch a database in SharePoint. You certainly can. You can certainly build lots of lists and have them talk to each other and build from scratch some sort of customized thing for yourself if that's where you want to go. But boy, that would be a lot of work, and I'd really be weighing that up as to whether or not you should be looking at a customized tool for that sort of thing. Similarly with project management. I'm sorry, I don't know if I can really answer a detailed question about architecture like that with that, with that amount of info.
No problem. We've got Monica, who asks about external partners for implementation of SharePoint. Is there anyone you would recommend?
Yeah, us. We do it. Info Exchange, this is the sort of projects we do all the time. So you're more than welcome to reach out to me and all my colleagues for a further discussion about it. And then there's lots of SharePoint businesses out there. So they tend to be a lot more expensive, I will say that, because they are very, their clients are corporate, so they have very for-profit rates, whereas we're a non-profit rate. But they're also, they're also very good and very, they tend to be more on the developer side, so they can do a lot more in terms of, like, customizing the site for you, whereas we specialize here on very much out-of-the-box stuff. A, because it's just what we can offer, and B, it tends to be what our clients mostly want. And but I think, look, there are places like OBS, there are places like Circle T, there are places like most of the Big Four now do this sort of stuff too. Like, if you wanted to give Deloitte a call, I'm sure they'd talk to you. And then I just do a bit of Googling. They're all good. It will come down to price and really what it is that you want to do.
And we've got Mary, who asks if your services are also available in New Zealand.
Yes, they are. Yeah, we have staff in New Zealand, and we also do project, and like some of our Australian staff will do projects in New Zealand. Yeah.
All right, I won't keep you for much longer, but we still have a few questions that haven't been answered. So do you mind if I send them to you via email, and so we can answer to the people who have asked those questions?
Sure, I'm happy to do them on email. That's fine.
All right. So is there anything you would like to say before I wrap things up?
Just thank you very much for listening, guys. I hope you learnt stuff and it was enjoyable. And yeah, if you got any further questions, happy for you to reach out. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Stephanie, for presenting today, and thank you everyone for joining us. I hope this webinar helped you understand SharePoint a bit better. If you have any question that comes to your mind after the webinar, please feel free to email me at events@connectingup.org, and I will forward them to Stephanie. As I said, if we haven't answered your question, I will also forward them to Stephanie, and we'll try to answer them as quickly as possible. As mentioned earlier as well, we will send you a link to the webinar recording in the next 2 business days. So please keep a lookout in your inbox. And thank you again for attending, and enjoy the rest of your day.